Welcome to the Airbnb Superhost Secrets Podcast, where we dive deep into the art and science of becoming a top-rated host. Today, we're tackling a question that I know keeps a lot of hosts up at night. How do you navigate the diverse world of Airbnb guests and make sure everyone has a great experience?
It's a challenge for sure. Every guest brings their own expectations and needs to the table, but that's part of what makes hosting so interesting.
Right. It's like a puzzle sometimes, figuring out how to create an experience that works for everyone. I've been seeing some discussions online that have me wondering, are there certain types of guests that are just trickier than others to host?
That's a fascinating question. It's important to remember that we can't make sweeping generalizations about any group of people, but I think it's fair to say that different demographics might have different travel styles and preferences.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. I came across a thread where some hosts were expressing concerns about older guests, the 50-plus crowd, having higher expectations and needing more assistance, which sometimes led to lower ratings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely true that generational differences can come into play when it comes to travel. What one generation considers basic might be seen as luxurious by another. But I think the key takeaway here is the importance of setting clear expectations right from the start.
So being super upfront in your listing about what your property offers and what guests can expect.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get specific. If you're not comfortable providing 24/7 support state that clearly in your house rules, if you have a strict no-noise policy after a certain hour, make sure guests are aware of that before they book. The more transparent you are, the better.
That makes sense. But what's interesting is I also saw some pushback from hosts who are over 50 themselves. They were saying, hey, great guests and not so great guests come in all ages. It's not about age, it's about finding the right match.
I love that perspective. It highlights how important it is to tailor your listing to attract the kind of guests you're most comfortable hosting. If you love having families with young children, make sure your listing emphasizes your kid-friendly amenities. If you prefer a quieter, more laid-back atmosphere, highlight that in your description. You can actually use your listing to filter potential guests and set the tone for their stay.
That's brilliant. So it's less about trying to cater to everyone and more about creating a niche for yourself as a host.
Absolutely. Think about it like this. You wouldn't expect a luxury boutique hotel to try and appeal to backpackers, right? They have a specific target audience in mind, and they cater their entire experience to that audience. You can do the same thing with your Airbnb.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. I saw some hosts talking about their preferences for certain types of travelers. One host mentioned they loved having tourists in the 25-35 age range because they found them to be low maintenance and adventurous. Another host said they avoided locals and short-term stays altogether.
It's all about knowing your hosting style and what you're comfortable with. There's no right or wrong answer here. Some hosts thrive on the energy of having different people coming and going all the time. Others prefer a more consistent flow of guests who stay for longer periods. It's all about finding what works best for you and your property. And remember, it's perfectly fine to turn down booking requests if you have a gut feeling that it's not the right fit. You're in control of your Airbnb, and you get to choose who you welcome into your space.
That's such a good reminder. I think it's easy to get caught up in trying to please everyone and maximize bookings, but sometimes saying no is the best way to protect yourself and your property.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial aspect of managing guest expectations, setting clear boundaries.
Oh, tell me about it. I've definitely had moments where I felt like I was running a 247 concierge service instead of an Airbnb.
It's a common trap for new hosts to fall into. We want to be helpful and accommodating, but it's important to remember that we also have a life outside of hosting.
So how do we find that balance? How do we set boundaries without seeming rude or unwelcoming?
Well, the first step is to be really clear about your expectations in your listing and house rules. For example, if you're not comfortable with guests having visitors, state that up front. If you have quiet hours, be specific about the times.
Okay, so basically lay down the law right from the start.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get detailed. The more information you provide up front, the less likely you are to encounter issues later on. Think of it as a preemptive strike against potential problems.
I like that. It's like setting the ground rules for a game before anyone starts playing.
Exactly. And remember, you can also use technology to help you manage guest expectations and communication. Consider using automated messages to answer frequently asked questions like directions to the property or instructions for using the Wi-Fi. This frees up your time to focus on other aspects of hosting.
You know what? I think this is a great time to address a question I've been hearing from a lot of hosts. What do I do when a guest makes an unreasonable request?
It's bound to happen at some point. The key is to stay calm and professional, even if you're feeling frustrated. Remember that you're running a business and you have the right to politely decline requests that are outside of the scope of what you offer.
So if a guest asks me to do their laundry or cook them dinner, it's okay to say sorry, but that's not a service I provide.
Absolutely. And you can always offer alternatives. For example, you could suggest a local laundry service or provide a list of nearby restaurants. The key is to be helpful without compromising your boundaries.
This is all so helpful. It feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders, just knowing that it's okay to set limits and prioritize my own well-being as a host.
It's all about finding that sweet spot where you feel comfortable and confident as a host, and where your guests feel welcomed and respected, but also understand the boundaries you've set.
Speaking of feeling comfortable, I came across a story about a host who's getting a lot of negative reviews from older guests, even when they seem to be doing everything right. It made me wonder, are reviews always a reliable indicator of how well you're doing as a host?
That's a really interesting point. Remember, reviews are subjective. What one guest loves, another might find fault with. And sometimes guests might be influenced by factors outside of your control, like bad weather or traffic delays.
So true. I guess it's all about taking reviews with a grain of salt and focusing on providing the best possible experience for the majority of your guests.
Exactly. You can't please everyone all the time. And sometimes a negative review can actually be an opportunity for growth. It might highlight an area where you can improve your listing description, your communication, or your amenities.
That's a great way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of getting defensive, use it as a chance to learn and get better.
Precisely. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the importance of finding your hosting style.
Yes, this feels like a crucial piece of the puzzle when it comes to creating a successful and sustainable Airbnb business.
Absolutely. It's like any other entrepreneurial venture. You have to figure out what you're good at, what you enjoy, and what sets you apart from the competition.
So how do we do that? How do we figure out our unique hosting style?
Well, I think it starts with self-reflection. Ask yourself some key questions. What kind of experience do I want to create for my guests? What are my strengths as a host? What am I passionate about sharing with others?
I love that. It's about being intentional and creating an experience that's authentic to who you are.
Exactly. And once you have a clear vision for your hosting style, you can start to make choices that align with that vision. From the way you decorate your property to the amenities you provide to the way you communicate with guests, every detail can reflect your unique personality and approach.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on what it means to be a successful Airbnb host. It's not just about providing a clean and comfortable space. It's about creating a curated experience that's tailored to a specific type of guest.
And it's about finding joy in the process. When you're passionate about hosting and you're genuinely excited to share your space with others, that enthusiasm shines through in every interaction.
So to wrap things up, what's the one piece of advice you would give to our listeners who are on the journey to becoming a superhost?
I would say take some time to reflect on what kind of host you want to be and what kind of guests you want to attract. This will help you create a more successful and enjoyable Airbnb hosting experience for everyone involved.
That's fantastic advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the art of navigating the diverse world of Airbnb guests.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope you've gained some valuable insights that will help you on your journey to superhost stardom. Until next time, happy hosting.